Nigerian Exchange Limited is ready to host the inaugural Nigerian Capital Market Conference. The conference, which will happen on Tuesday, November the 30th, has the theme, The Future Ready Capital Market, Innovating for Nigeria's Sustainable Recovery. Well, to tell us more about this conference and its importance towards greater capital flows is the Chief Executive Officer, Nigerian Exchange Limited, Mr. Temi Bokbola. Thank you very much, Mr. Bokbola, for joining us on the program. Good morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Now, the Future Ready Capital Market, innovating for Nigeria's sustainable recovery. That's the theme of your conference. Why is this theme apt at this time?
Thank you very much for the question. The reason we've chosen this theme, and perhaps also the reason we're doing this conference, is really because when we take a look at the collective challenges that face us all as a nation, which of course you have the government trying to resolve, you've got different parts of the nation trying to resolve. One of the things that we find is that the capital markets is an often overlooked potential remedy for some of these problems. And it's one of the reasons we've thought to elevate the discourse around the capital markets. And of course, tied with that is that if you look really at the just very foundation of our demography as a nation, it's a very youthful population, and that speaks to the future. It speaks to hope as well. And one of the things that we're looking to do with this conference is really to try to unite all of those themes. So looking through to the future, connecting that with all of the problems and challenges that we face today, and looking to really spend time as to how the capital markets could be a facilitator at some of these problems.
Yeah, sure. Now, driving government economic growth plans using the capital market, that's one of the key topics to be discussed at this conference. We know the government is low in revenue and has continued to borrow to fund its budget. What key issues are expected to be raised on this particular topic at the conference?
So really what we're trying to do here also is similar to what I said earlier. If you think about the challenges facing us, everything from perhaps power, unemployment, we're looking for stronger economic growth. We're looking for increased capital just to drive all that we're doing. The capital markets really could be a way to resolve that. So as we explore this subject, we'll be looking, for example, at each of these themes and looking, for example, at global best practices. You would find that Nigeria and its evolution today is about 20 years behind where India was. How were they able, for example, to solve some of the problems that they have, that they had at the time? So we'll look at things like that. And then, of course, we'll bring it into more practical things, really to say, well, you know, as the government, besides just funding, for example, what we find is that listed corporates, they pay more taxes, for example, which is helpful for the government. They hire more people. There's more transparency to their operations. They're held to higher standards, as an example. You find that corporates who go through sort of capital markets as well really then also key into a lot of these key sort of government type initiatives. So again, in this panel, which is really then focused more around the government, we'll be exploring everything from funding to some of these bigger macroeconomic themes that we think the markets can help us to resolve.
Right, and of course there is the issue of driving capital market recovery through policy advocacy, and of course the role of the private sector in growing the capital market. These are all, you know, part of the topics to be discussed in this conference. So for these particular topics, what do we hope to hear?
Okay, so I think that the way the flow of the conference is set up is that first and foremost, we will explore what can the capital markets do for governments. Then we'll also explore what the capital markets can do for the private sector. We'll be having, you know, industry giants discuss how, for example, they have accessed the capital markets to drive their growth, to drive operations. And then we'll explore these two broad areas. The question then is, what can we do to strengthen our capital markets, to some will say revive our capital markets? And one of the things that you find there is that to do that, it's really also tied back to policy. Policy really around what the key benefits, for example, that corporates will derive from being listed, policy around how ease of coming to the markets to raise capital, policies around just innovation also around the capital markets. If you look at a lot of our rules and regulations, many of them also could be due for amendments that are in line with current global economic norms and trends. So that's really how we see this going, such that at the end of it all, I think across both government and the private sector, there'd be a sort of very shared understanding as to whose role is what and how we drive that.
All right. Now, industry players have been calling on the government to securitize some of its corporate assets. You recently announced a partnership with the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. Are we seeing a future listing of some of the government-owned corporations like the NNPC on the exchange soon?
Yes, indeed. This is part of the work that we are doing. And it really speaks, for example, to the heart of some of these themes that I spoke to earlier. You know, if you have corporates listed, drives governance, much stronger levels of governance, drives transparency, and a lot of the other benefits that I mentioned. So, you know, one of the things that you find in a few other countries is how you try to get the government to focus more on administration. And just leave, I guess, to the rest of the wider economy, to the private sector, as it were, other parts of just operability. So we do think, and this subject, to be fair, has been discussed quite widely before around the nation, but it's time to shine, I guess, a new lens on it. So yes, indeed, opportunities for privatization of government assets, opportunities to leverage, you know, government resources, whether those are through partnerships with the private sector, whether those are through just outright access to capital markets. This is really the direction that we think the government should be going.
Yeah, so what policies has the exchange put in place to encourage, you know, participation from individuals?
Are you referring to the conference, or are you speaking more broadly?
Pardon me?
Are you referring to individuals?
No, talking about some of your policies that you have tried to put in place to encourage even individuals in coming to the market.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. It's a very good question. I spoke earlier about just the demography of Nigeria. You know, about 85% of our population is under 20 years old. One of the things that you find is that a big chunk of these individuals are not investing today. If you look at the makeup of, you know, the investors today across the capital markets in Nigeria, they tend to be concentrated around the 50-year-old mark. Now, the question then is, what do you need to do to attract this new class of Nigerians? There are two things. One is ease of access to the markets, and that needs to happen through technology. So we need to get our markets to a point where, you know, the millennials, the younger demography who spend quite a bit of time on devices can also find us there and relatively easier. So that's one thing that's keeping us extremely busy. It's one of the things that we'll be discussing at this conference. The other, of course, is around products. You know, it takes you back to the fundamental question that for investors to come to your exchange, they must find products that meet their investment needs and investment criteria. So for us as an exchange, we are spending quite some time really around just product origination, around innovation of products to make sure that things that are on the exchange are fit for purpose and will meet the needs of these people. We think that if we can do these two things, of course, work on a few other things on marketing. For example, people need to know that the capital markets really are a viable source of investing, for example, which is why we're doing a conference like this. We'll see a lot more of these individuals come through.
All right, Mr. Wola. Now, the year is gradually coming to an end. I remember in 2020, the Nigerian stock market was adjudged the best. So are we likely to see that happen this year?
Thank you for that question. Well, first and foremost, you know, the performance of markets is usually not in the hands of exchange operators. I think it's important to make that point. Of course, it's nice for markets to perform well, The truth also, though, is that in markets like ours, it's a two-way street. There's volatility. Markets go up and they come down. We try to focus more on longer-term trends, really, particularly for example, equity investments in this case. And of course, even fixed income investments. Back to the demographic discussion we had, it's really a long-term view that most markets in Nigeria should take. Of course, speaking about the exchange, what we've seen as far as performance is concerned is that the year started very strong. In line with the macroeconomic conditions, we saw a contraction, we saw a very much reduced level of activity, but we've had a very strong Q3. And I think we're going to have a very strong Q4. The momentum, I think the wind is on our back, as it were. So I think we'll finish the year, at least the current trend, it looks like potentially double-digit returns, which should be a good sort of testament on the back of what was a very strong performance last year, as you say.
I want to share in that optimism there. Anyway, finally, before I let you go, so who are we expecting at this conference?
Okay, so the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria will deliver the keynote address. He is confirmed. We have the Speaker of the House of Representatives also. He is confirmed as a guest of honor. The chairman of the event is Alhaji Abdul Samad Rabiu of Bua Group. We have quite a few governors confirmed, governors of Ekiti State, Edo State, and that's not in any particular order. We have the finance minister who will be joining us as well. We have director generals of several agencies of government who will be joining us, captains of industry, fund managers, capital market operators. So we do think that it's the right quality of really needed participants for these subjects. It's a hybrid event. So there is the physical event. Most of these people have mentioned are joining us physically, but there is the opportunity for those who would like to join us online through Zoom to also participate. We of course also have His Highness the 14th Emir of Kano, who would also be joining us to give an address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Popola, for your time this morning. We do appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the day.
And you too. Thank you for having me.